The officer's knee was still on the back of the bench when the sketchbook hit the concrete. It landed open, spine up, then settled flat the way a tired bird folds its wings. Pencils rolled across the sidewalk in 4 directions. The woman was on the ground beside it, her left elbow torn through her sleeve, a thin line of blood running down her forearm into the crease of her wrist. The first officer, the one who had pulled her off the bench, looked down at the open pages and stopped walking. His partner, 3 steps behind, came around and looked too. The page on the left held a portrait of an old woman holding a ring up to the light from a window, her face caught between confusion and something that looked like the last flicker of recognition. The page on the right held a portrait of a man in uniform, standing under a streetlight, drawn with the kind of care that makes a face more real on paper than it ever looks in a mirror. Both officers lowered themselves to the concrete beside the open book. Not together. Not at the same time. The first went down fast, like something under him had given way. The second sank slowly, one knee and then the other, his hand reaching for the page, but not touching it. At 2 a.m, in a park with no working lights, 2 officers knelt on the sidewalk beside a woman they had just dragged off a bench, and neither one of them could speak. But to understand what they were looking at and why it broke the night in half, you need to go back 6 weeks to a woman named Loretta Sims and a bench she had been sitting on for 3 years before anyone told her she did not belong there. Loretta Sims worked the overnight shift at Greystone Home Health, caring for elderly patients who could not care for themselves. She bathed them when they could not lift their arms. She fed them when their hands forgot how to hold a spoon. She turned them every 2 hours to prevent sores from forming on skin that had grown thin enough to tear like wet paper. She talked to them at 3 a.m. when the disorientation set in, and they called her by their daughters' names. She made $16.50 an hour. She had done this for 19 years. Her shift ended at midnight. Every night, she walked 3 blocks from the Greystone facility on Dorset Avenue to a bench in Meridian Park. The park was a small rectangle of grass bordered by a row of elm trees that had been planted during the neighborhood's first block party in 1981. 4 benches. A fountain that had not worked in 6 years. 1 streetlight that still functioned, positioned directly above the second bench from the north end. That was Loretta's bench. She sat under that light and she drew. Before she opened her sketchbook each night, she tore a narrow strip from the edge of her page, no wider than her little finger, and folded it into a bird. She did this with the paper flat on her knee, pressing each fold with her thumbnail until the creases were sharp enough to hold. Then she wedged the bird between the slats of the bench and opened to a fresh page. She had been doing this every night for 3 years. Beneath the bench, in the gap between the seat and the support beam, a colony of tiny paper birds had accumulated, bleached by rain and curled by humidity, a flock that no one had ever noticed because no one had ever looked. The sketchbook was a hardbound book with a black cover and unlined pages. She was on her 14th. The previous 13 sat on a shelf in her bedroom closet, arranged by date. They contained over 1,600 portraits of people from the neighborhood, people she watched from her bench, and people she drew from memory. The night security guard at the office building across the street, the woman who walked a 3-legged dog at 1:30 every morning, the couple who sat on the bench nearest the fountain and talked in voices so low that Loretta never heard a word but always understood the conversation. She drew people the way she cared for them, starting with the left hand, because the left hand was the one people forgot about, the one that did the quiet work while the right hand got the attention. On Saturday mornings, Loretta sat at the kitchen table with her granddaughter, Zoe, who was 9 years old and drew constantly. Zoe drew in ballpoint pen on the backs of grocery receipts, on napkins, on the blank spaces of junk mail. Loretta was saving for Zoe's enrollment in the summer art intensive at the Grover Community Center. $400. She had $340 in a coffee can on top of the refrigerator. Built one $5 bill at a time from a job that paid her less per hour than the parking meter on the street outside the homes where her patients lived. Her daughter, Brianna, worked 2 jobs and could not cover the difference. The art program started in 7 weeks. Loretta added to the coffee can every Friday. One of the patients Loretta had cared for during the previous year was a woman named Gloria Mercer. Gloria had dementia. She lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on Vine Street, and by the time Loretta was assigned to her, Gloria had stopped recognizing her own son. Loretta spent 9 months with Gloria. She fed her. She brushed her hair. She held Gloria's hand when Gloria woke up at 2 a.m. and did not know where she was. Gloria had a habit that Loretta never forgot. She would take her wedding ring off, hold it up to whatever light was closest, and stare at it as though she were trying to read something written on the inside of the band. She did not know what the ring was, but her hand remembered the motion. Loretta drew Gloria from memory, 4 months after Gloria died, capturing that exact gesture, the ring held up to window light, the left hand doing the work the mind could no longer manage. Gloria's son, Sean Mercer, had visited his mother twice during the last year of her life. Loretta had met him once. He wore a police uniform. He stood in the doorway of his mother's apartment for 7 minutes, said he would come back Sunday, and did not come back for 4 months. When Gloria died, Loretta was the one who called him. He thanked her and asked if his mother had said anything at the end. Loretta told him Gloria had asked for someone named David, which was Gloria's late husband's name. She did not tell Sean that Gloria had never once asked for her son. 6 weeks before the night in the park, Loretta was sitting on her bench at 1:45 a.m., sketching the security guard across the street, when a flashlight hit her directly in the eyes. The light was so bright that the afterimage stayed in her vision for 10 seconds after she looked away. "Ma'am, what are you doing out here?" The voice belonged to Officer Derek Holt, 36, 4 years on the night patrol. He stood above her with his flashlight angled down at her face, his partner 3 steps behind. His partner was Sean Mercer. Loretta shielded her eyes. "I'm drawing. Just a drawing." He said the word as though he were identifying an object he had found on the ground and could not determine the purpose of. "At 2 in the morning. I come here after work." "Where do you work?" "Greystone Home Health on Dorset." "And you come here to a park in the dark to draw?" "Yes." Derek tilted his flashlight toward her sketchbook. The beam washed out the half-finished portrait on the page. "I'm going to need to see some ID." Loretta gave him her driver's license. He took it to his patrol car, ran it, and came back 4 minutes later. "You're clean," he said. He handed the license back without meeting her eyes. "This park is not a safe place for someone like you at this hour. I'd recommend you find somewhere else to spend your time. It's a public park. I'm not going to ask you again." Loretta closed her sketchbook. She put her pencils in the cloth roll she kept in her bag. She stood up. She looked at Sean Mercer, standing 3 steps behind his partner, his face half lit by the patrol car's headlights. He looked at the ground. Loretta walked home. She came back the next night. From his window on the 3rd floor of the Ridgely Arms apartment building, Gordon Avery watched the whole thing. Gordon was 67, a retired civics teacher who had lived in that apartment for 22 years. He had watched Loretta sketch from his window for nearly 3 years. He had never spoken to her. He had never gone down to the park at night. He watched, from behind glass, The way a man watches something that is not yet his problem. Derek came back 1 week later. This time he did not ask questions. He walked directly to Loretta's bench, stood above her, and aimed his flashlight at her sketchbook page. The beam was so bright that the pencil lines disappeared under the white glare. He held it there. Loretta looked up at him. He said nothing. She said nothing. He stood over her for 3 full minutes, the light burning her page into a blank white square, and then walked away without a word. Sean followed. 3 days after that, Derek brought Sean with him again. This time he told Loretta to stand up, put her hands where he could see them, and step away from the bench. She did. Derek picked up her sketchbook. He opened it. He turned the pages slowly, the way a person flips through a magazine in a waiting room, looking at nothing and seeing everything. "These are nice," he said. His voice held the specific flatness of a man delivering a compliment he intended as a warning. He set the sketchbook back on the bench, open, face down, the pages pressed against the wood. "Have a good night." The following week, a report appeared in the precinct system. It was filed by Officer Derek Holt. It read, "Unidentified female, age 55 to 60, observed loitering in Meridian Park after hours on multiple occasions. No criminal activity observed. Possible welfare concern." The report was flagged for follow-up. 2 nights later, 2 officers Loretta had never seen arrived at her bench. They were polite. They asked if she was all right. They asked if she had somewhere to go. One of them offered her a card for a women's shelter on Fulton Street. Loretta looked at the card in her hand. A woman who worked 40 hours a week, who paid rent, who was raising a grandchild's future one $5 bill at a time, holding a card for a shelter because a man with a flashlight had called her a welfare concern. She put the card in her bag and kept sketching. Derek contacted the Parks Department. His email, which Loretta would later obtain through a public records request, cited ongoing concerns about after-hours activity in Meridian Park and requested enhanced safety measures, including adjusted lighting schedules. 2 weeks later, the park's streetlights were reprogrammed to shut off at 11 p.m. instead of 1 a.m. Loretta's light went dark. She brought a small battery-powered clip lamp the next night and fastened it to the edge of her sketchbook. She drew in a circle of light no bigger than a dinner plate. The welfare check reached her employer. Loretta's supervisor, a woman who had never questioned her competence in 19 years, called her into the office. "We received an inquiry about your well-being. Is there anything going on that we should know about?" Loretta explained. The supervisor was kind. She said she understood. Then she said, "Maybe take a break from the park for a while, just until this settles down." Loretta heard what the words meant underneath. The thing she did to stay human after 8 hours of holding other people together was now a liability to the job that kept her family fed. That same week, Loretta met Ruby Lawson. Ruby was 78 years old. She lived in the Ridgely Arms, 4 floors above Gordon Avery. She used a wooden cane with a rubber grip that she wrapped in blue electrical tape because the original grip had worn smooth. Ruby used to walk in Meridian Park every evening after dinner, one slow lap around the perimeter, the way her doctor had told her to. 3 months ago, an officer matching Derek's description had stopped Ruby on the path and told her the park was closed after dark. There was no closing time posted. There was no ordinance. But Ruby did not argue with a police officer. She went home. She had not left her apartment after 7 p.m. since. Her evening walks, the only exercise she got, the only time she breathed outside air that was not filtered through a window screen, stopped. Loretta drew Ruby's portrait that night from memory. She drew the cane first, the blue tape around the grip, the way Ruby held it with both hands when she stood still, as though the cane were holding her up and she were holding it together. 2 weeks later, Loretta saw something that changed the shape of everything she thought she understood. She was sitting on her bench at 12:30 a.m. when Ruby Lawson came through the park entrance. Ruby moved slowly, her cane tapping the concrete path, her coat buttoned to the neck despite the warm night. She had come back. She sat on the bench nearest the broken fountain and looked up at the sky the way a person looks at something they have missed. 11 minutes later, Derek's patrol car pulled into the lot. He walked into the park alone. Sean was not with him. He approached Ruby's bench. "Ma'am, we talked about this. I'm just sitting. And I told you this park is not safe after dark. You need to go home." Ruby's hands tightened on her cane. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 31 years. This park is 200 feet from my front door." Derek looked at the cane. He reached down and took it from her hands, the way a teacher takes a phone from a student, without asking, without pause. He walked it to the fence at the edge of the park, 30 feet away, and leaned it against the chain link. Then he came back. "Go on home," he said. "Your cane is over there when you're ready." Ruby sat on the bench without her cane. She was 30 feet from the thing that kept her upright, and the man who had taken it was standing between her and it. Loretta watched from her bench, 40 feet away. Her pencil stopped in the middle of a line. She watched Ruby grip the edge of the bench with both hands and pull herself to standing. She watched Ruby take one step, then another, each one a negotiation with gravity that Ruby was not certain she would win. She watched Ruby reach the fence, pick up her cane, and walk out of the park without looking back. Derek saw Loretta watching. He walked over. "You're still here," he said. He looked at her sketchbook, open on her lap. He saw the half-finished portrait of Ruby. He reached down and tore the page out of the book. The sound of the paper ripping was small and specific, like a fingernail catching on fabric. He folded the page in half and dropped it on the ground. "You don't need to be drawing people without their permission," he said. "That's surveillance." He walked away. Loretta picked up the torn page. She unfolded it. Ruby's face was creased down the middle, a line running from her forehead to her chin, dividing the portrait into two halves that no longer aligned. That night, from his third-floor window, Gordon Avery watched Derek take the cane. He watched Ruby walk 30 feet without it. He watched Derek tear the portrait. Gordon had been watching for 6 weeks. He had a cell phone in his hand. He had been holding it every night, the camera app open, his thumb over the record button. He had not pressed it once. 2 days later, Loretta knocked on Gordon's door. She had seen his silhouette in the window. She knew someone had been watching. Gordon opened the door and looked at her the way a man looks at the thing he has been avoiding. "I know you've been up there," Loretta said. "I need your help." Gordon was a civics teacher for 34 years. He knew how to file public records requests. Over the next 2 weeks, he and Loretta filed 7 requests with the city. The documents that came back changed the shape of the story from a single officer's behavior into something with architecture. Derek's incident reports about Meridian Park were not sitting in a precinct file. They had been forwarded to the city's Planning and Development Commission as part of a safety assessment attached to a rezoning proposal. The proposal, filed by Councilwoman Patricia Neville, sought to reclassify the 2 lots adjacent to Meridian Park from residential to mixed-use commercial. The safety assessment cited persistent after-hours incidents as evidence that the park was a public safety liability. The incidents cited were Derek's reports, every one of them about Loretta, Ruby, or a young grocery stalker named Calvin Palmer, who walked through the park on his way home from the night shift. Calvin was 24. He worked at Bridgewater Foods, unloading pallets from midnight to 6 a.m. He walked through Meridian Park because it cut 15 minutes off his commute. Derek had stopped Calvin 4 times in 2 months, searched his backpack twice, told him to find a different route. Calvin now walked an extra mile along the highway shoulder, 25 additional minutes on his feet after a shift spent on his feet. He did it because the alternative was standing in a park at 1 a.m. explaining to a man with a badge that he was allowed to walk home. The connection was Patricia Neville's husband, a man named Dale Neville, whose construction firm had submitted the lowest bid on the development project that required the rezoning. The incident reports justified the safety assessment. The safety assessment justified the rezoning. The rezoning justified the demolition of the community center adjacent to the park, a building that housed, among other things, the Grover Community Center Summer Art Intensive, where Loretta was trying to send her granddaughter. If the rezoning went through, the building came down. The art program closed. Zoe's $400 enrollment became $400 for nothing, and the park, the 4 benches, the broken fountain, the elms planted in 1981, the colony of paper birds. All of it would become a parking structure for a mixed-use retail complex. Loretta filed a formal complaint with the precinct about Derek's conduct. She was directed to Sergeant Vivian Cross, the community relations officer. Vivian sat across from Loretta in a small office with a window that looked out onto the precinct parking lot. She took notes on a yellow pad. She nodded at the right moments. She gave Loretta her card. "I'm going to look into this personally," Vivian said. "In the meantime, I'd recommend staying away from the park after dark, for your own safety." 2 weeks passed. Loretta called Vivian 3 times. The first time, Vivian said the investigation was ongoing. The second time, Vivian said these things take time. The third time, Vivian did not answer. Loretta called the precinct's main number and asked for the status of her complaint. The desk officer checked the system and told her no complaint had been entered. Vivian Cross had listened, nodded, written notes on a yellow pad, and filed nothing. The night everything converged, the night from the opening of this story, was a Tuesday. Loretta knew the bench was scheduled for removal in 3 days. The Parks Department had posted a notice. "Maintenance and safety improvements, Meridian Park, effective Friday." She had seen the notice taped to the bench that morning when she walked past the park on her way to buy milk. She went to work. She cared for her patients. She turned them in their beds. She held a 91-year-old man's hand while he asked for a woman named Louise who had been dead for 12 years. She clocked out at midnight. She walked to the park. She sat on her bench under the dead streetlight, with her clip lamp casting its small circle on the page. She tore a strip of paper from the edge. She folded a bird. She wedged it between the slats. She opened to a fresh page and began to draw. At 1:50 a.m., Derek Holt's patrol car turned into the lot. The headlights swept across the bench and found her there. Derek stepped out. Sean Mercer stepped out from the passenger side. They walked into the park together. Gordon Avery, in his 3rd-floor window, pressed record. Derek stopped 4 feet from the bench. "Stand up." Loretta kept drawing. Her pencil moved in short, careful strokes across the lower half of the page. She was drawing Sean Mercer's shoes. "I said stand up." "I heard you." "You're under arrest for failure to comply with a lawful order." "Oh, there is no lawful order. This is a public park. There is no curfew." Derek reached for her left arm. He gripped it above the elbow and pulled. Loretta's body came off the bench sideways. Her sketchbook slid from her lap, hit the edge of the seat, and fell open on the concrete. Her pencils spilled from the cloth roll and scattered. Her clip lamp fell, and the light hit the sidewalk at an angle that threw a long shadow from the bench across the open pages. Loretta was on the ground. Her left elbow had torn through her sleeve. A thin line of blood ran down her forearm. She did not cry out. She looked at her sketchbook on the concrete the way a mother looks at a child who has fallen in the street. Sean Mercer came around Derek and looked down at the open pages. On the left page, a portrait of an old woman holding a ring up to window light. The left hand raised, the fingers gentle around the band, the face caught in that specific place between forgetting and almost remembering. On the right page, a portrait of a man in uniform standing under a streetlight, his face drawn without the hardness the artist had every reason to put there, his expression resting, human, and beneath the portrait, in Loretta's handwriting. October 14th, 1:52 a.m. He seemed tired. Sean looked at the left page. He looked at the ring in the drawn hand. He looked at the tilt of the woman's head, the way her chin dropped slightly to the left when she concentrated. He knew that tilt. He had grown up watching it across the dinner table. He had seen it the last time he visited his mother, and she held a fork the wrong way and did not know why. Sean went down to his knees. Not because he chose to, because the distance between standing and the portrait on the ground was too far to cross without getting closer, and getting closer meant his legs forgot what they were doing. Derek looked at Sean. He looked at the sketchbook. He saw the portrait of himself, the date, the time, the note in the margin. He began turning pages backward. Each page held a portrait. Each portrait had a date, a time, and a note in the corner. October 7th. He took her cane. October 12th. Same man stopped the boy with the backpack. October 3rd. He stood over me for 3 minutes, did not speak. September 28th. First time, he called me ma'am but did not mean it. Derek's knees hit the concrete. The listener who saw the opening of this story believed both officers knelt from the same emotion. They did not. Sean knelt because he was looking at his mother's face drawn by the woman he had just helped drag off a bench. Derek knelt because he was looking at a visual record of every act he had committed in this park for 6 weeks, documented in detail, dated, noted, and drawn with the precision of a woman who had been watching him more carefully than he had been watching her. From the 3rd floor, Gordon Avery's phone captured all of it. The dragging, the fall, the sketchbook on the ground, both officers on their knees. 3 minutes and 42 seconds of footage that Gordon uploaded to the neighborhood's community board at 2:15 a.m., sitting at his kitchen table, his hands unsteady on the keyboard, knowing that every officer in the precinct would know his face by morning. The video reached 4,000 views by noon. By evening, the local news affiliate had called the precinct for comment. By the following morning, the community board at Bethany Baptist Church was calling an emergency meeting. The meeting was held on Thursday evening in the church fellowship hall, 43 hours after the video was posted. Loretta did not want to speak. Brianna told her she had to. Zoe held Loretta's hand while they walked from the car to the church entrance, and when Loretta felt the child's fingers tighten around hers, she understood that the $400 in the coffee can and the art program and the community center and the bench in the park were all the same thing. They were the space where a person is allowed to exist as themselves, and someone was trying to pave it. The fellowship hall held 200 people. Every seat was full. 40 more stood along the walls. Loretta walked to the front of the room carrying a canvas tote bag that held 4 of her sketchbooks. She placed the first book on the table. She opened it. "This is Ruby Lawson," she said. The portrait showed Ruby on her bench, her cane between her knees, the blue tape visible on the grip. She walked in Meridian Park every evening for 5 years. An officer told her the park was closed after dark. It has never been closed after dark. She hasn't left her apartment after 7 p.m. in 3 months. She turned the page. This is Calvin Palmer. He works the night shift at Bridgewater Foods. He walked through the park on his way home. An officer stopped him 4 times in 2 months and searched his backpack twice. He now walks an extra mile along the highway shoulder. She turned the page. She turned the page again. Each portrait had a date, a time, and a note. Each note was 1 sentence. Each sentence was a record. The room absorbed them the way the ground absorbs rain, slowly and then all at once. Gordon Avery stood up from the 3rd row. He was wearing a button-down shirt he had ironed that morning, the first shirt he had ironed in 2 years. I live on the 3rd floor of the Ridgely Arms. My window faces the park. I've watched this woman draw on that bench for 3 years. I watched that officer take Mrs. Lawson's cane and make her walk across the park without it. I watched him tear a page out of her sketchbook. I recorded the video you saw online. I should have come down there months ago. I didn't. I was scared. I'm still scared. But I'm here now, and I'll say what I saw under oath if I have to. Gordon sat down. His hands gripped the edge of his chair. The woman next to him, a stranger, put her hand on his arm. Ruby Lawson stood up. She used both hands on her cane to push herself to her feet. "I'm 78 years old," she said. "I survived things in this country that would make that officer cry into his badge. I am not afraid of a man with a flashlight. I'm afraid of what happens when nobody else in the park says a word while he takes my cane. That is what I'm afraid of." She sat down. The room stayed standing. Loretta opened the last sketchbook. She turned to a page near the back. The page held no portrait. It held a diagram, hand-drawn, with lines connecting boxes. At the top, a box labeled Officer Holt, Incident Reports. An arrow pointing to a box labeled Planning Commission Safety Assessment. An arrow from there to Councilwoman Neville Rezoning Proposal. An arrow from there to Dale Neville Construction Development Bid. An arrow from there to Meridian Park Demolition of Community Center. The officer who dragged me off a bench at 2 a.m. was not keeping anyone safe, Loretta said. He was generating paperwork. Each report he filed about me, about Mrs. Lawson, about Mr. Palmer, about anyone in that park after dark, went into a file that was being used to justify tearing down the community center next to Meridian Park and rezoning the land for commercial development. The developer is the husband of the council member who filed the proposal. The officer's reports are the only evidence cited in the safety assessment. Without them, there is no case for rezoning. She closed the book. I filed a complaint with the precinct 6 weeks ago. Sergeant Vivian Cross took my statement and told me she would investigate. She filed nothing. The complaint does not exist in their system. I have Sergeant Cross's business card. I have the dates of my 3 follow-up calls. I have the recording from the desk officer who told me no complaint was on file. The room was holding more weight than its walls were built for. The dominoes fell the way dominoes fall when the first one has been standing too long. Derek Holt was suspended within 48 hours of the community meeting. The internal affairs investigation, accelerated by the video and the public records Loretta and Gordon had gathered, confirmed a pattern of targeted enforcement against Black residents of the Meridian Park neighborhood. Derek's incident reports were reviewed, and each one was cross-referenced against the precinct's own dispatch logs. The logs showed no calls for service in Meridian Park during the times Derek claimed to be responding to safety concerns. He had not been dispatched. He had been hunting. Derek was terminated 5 weeks later. His separation notice cited abuse of authority, falsification of records, and conduct unbecoming. His file was flagged with a permanent notation that followed him into the state licensing database. He applied to 2 other departments over the following year. Neither one responded. The last anyone heard, he was driving a delivery truck for a furniture warehouse in a town 90 miles away, a place where no one knew his name and no one had seen the video. But the video was still online. It would be online for as long as the internet existed. His name was attached to it the way a street sign is attached to a pole, permanently and at the right height for everyone to read. Vivian Cross was referred for disciplinary review. The investigation found that she had received Loretta's complaint, written detailed notes during the meeting, and then placed those notes in her desk drawer without entering them into the system. She had done this with 2 other complaints from community members in the previous year. Her explanation, entered into the record during her hearing, was that she had been told by a superior to use discretion about which complaints warranted formal processing. She would not name the superior. She was demoted to desk duty. She resigned 4 months later. The rezoning proposal was pulled from the Planning Commission's agenda 3 days after the community meeting. Councilwoman Patricia Neville issued a statement saying the proposal had been tabled for further community input. She did not mention her husband's construction firm. A local journalist, following up on Loretta's diagram, published the connection the following week. Patricia Neville did not run for re-election. Dale Neville's firm lost 2 municipal contracts within the quarter. The bench in Meridian Park was not removed. The maintenance notice was taken down. The street light above Loretta's bench was repaired. The park's lighting schedule was restored to 1 a.m. Sean Mercer testified during the internal affairs investigation. He confirmed every encounter he had witnessed. He confirmed that he had watched Derek take Ruby's cane, that he had watched Derek tear the portrait, that he had stood 3 steps behind his partner and said nothing. He confirmed that he knew what was happening and chose silence, because silence was easier than confrontation, and because Derek had seniority, and because Sean had learned in his first week on the force that the fastest way to lose your place was to question the man standing next to you. His testimony cost him his place anyway. Other officers stopped speaking to him in the break room. His locker was moved to the end of the row. He requested a transfer to a precinct 40 minutes away, and it was granted. Before he left, Sean found Loretta. She was sitting on her bench. It was a Saturday afternoon, daylight, the first time he had seen her in the sun. He stood at the edge of the park for a full minute before walking over. The portrait of the woman with the ring, he said. That was my mother. I know. How did you remember her like that? She couldn't even remember herself by the end. Loretta looked at him. Your mother held that ring up to the light every evening between 8 and 8:30. She did it for the entire 9 months I was with her. Her mind was leaving, but her left hand remembered everything she loved. Sean sat on the bench beside Loretta. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and he stayed like that for a long time. Bent forward, his shoulders moving with something he had sealed away for 8 months that had finally found the crack in the wall. Loretta did not touch him. She did not tell him it was all right. She sat beside him the way she sat beside her patients at 3 a.m. when the grief came and there was nothing to do but be present for it. When Sean lifted his head, his eyes were red. I should have visited her more. Yes, Loretta said, you should have. She did not say it to punish him. She said it because it was true, and because the truth was the only thing she had ever offered anyone, and because Sean Mercer deserved the same honesty she gave to every face she drew. The left hand does the quiet work. Loretta's left hand, the one that drew first, the one that held the pencil, the one that cared for Gloria Mercer through 9 months of forgetting, had never stopped working even when the people it served refused to see it. Gordon Avery came down from his 3rd-floor apartment the week after the meeting. He knocked on the frame of the park bench where Loretta was sitting. Mind if I sit? It's a public bench. Gordon sat. He brought a thermos of coffee and 2 cups. He told Loretta he used to teach at Jefferson Middle School. He told her his students called him Mr. A. He told her he had been watching her from his window for 3 years and never came down because he told himself it was not his problem, and that the lie he told himself was the same lie an entire country tells itself every time it sees something wrong from a safe distance, and decides the glass between here and there is thick enough to excuse doing nothing. Gordon came to the park every night after that. He sat on the bench next to Loretta's and read a book under a clip lamp of his own. He did not draw. He did not talk much. He was there. Ruby Lawson came back to the park on a Wednesday evening in November, the first time in 4 months. She walked one slow lap around the perimeter. When she passed Loretta's bench, she paused. "You drew me," Ruby said. "I did." "Am I in the book?" "You're in 3 of them." Ruby nodded once, the way a woman nods when she has been told she exists in a place that cannot be erased. She continued her walk. The blue tape on her cane caught the light from the restored streetlight, and for a moment, it looked like a small flame moving along the path. The Grover Community Center did not close. The art program ran that summer as scheduled. Zoe Sims enrolled with the full $400, the last $60 added to the coffee can by Gordon Avery, who left it in an envelope on Loretta's bench with a note that said, "For the left hand." On the first night after the bench was supposed to be removed and was not, Loretta sat down, tore a strip from the edge of her page, and folded a bird. She wedged it between the slats. Beneath the bench, 3 years of paper birds rustled in the slight wind. A flock that had been there all along, waiting for someone to notice that the woman who made them had never once stopped showing up. She opened her sketchbook. She picked up her pencil. She drew the left hand first. Have you ever watched something happening from a safe distance and told yourself it was not your problem? What would it take for you to come down from the window? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what your moment would be. If this story made you think about the distance between seeing and doing, subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it.